to take away children. Those 6 words from Attorney General Jeff Sessions have come to define a shameful moment in American history, but they don't explain it, which is what I have spent the past 5 years working to do. Because as easy as it would be to blame scapegoats like Sessions for the fact that American immigration officials forcibly wrenched thousands of children from their parents, history-defining moments like this are never that easily explained. I covered family separations as they were happening for the New York Times. What struck me most wasn't that a few people with relentlessly hawkish views had pushed for this policy, but it's that hundreds of members of our apolitical bureaucracy implemented it. The sheer scale of the harm they imposed and the subtle way that they were co-opted into it made it impossible for me to move on when the news cycle ended. And that's the story I set out to tell for The Atlantic magazine, starting in 2020. Over 18 months, I sued the government for thousands of pages of internal records. I laid them out on the floor in my Brooklyn apartment until they made sense, and then I created a system to cross-reference them with other reports and investigations that had been written, with news clips, and with my own interviews. I spoke to more than 150 people. If they didn't take my calls or emails, I sent letters in the mail or I just showed up at their door. Sure enough, a handful of hawks had no qualms about what happened at the border. But most people I talked to found ways to justify their actions, both to me and to themselves. They told me they were trying to help families, not harm them, parroting long disproven theories of border enforcement. Or they said they always knew family separations were wrong, but that they hoped somebody else in some other department would have stepped in to stop this from happening. No one did. In the end, I wrote a 30,000-word story, one of the longest in the Atlantic's history, that implicated everybody, because both Republican and Democratic presidents have perpetuated this dubious theory of deterrence that gave rise to family separations in the first place, and because both the shameless hawks and the misguided bureaucrats deserved blame. As journalists, we have to be willing to acknowledge these uncomfortable truths, because confirming the oversimplified narratives of one side or the other won't equip our audiences with what they need to confront the challenges we're facing as a society. Global migration and displacement are among the biggest. Here's another example. Earlier this year, I traveled to Poland, where millions of people had fled Ukraine following Russia's invasion. While I was there, I met a bereft mother named Irina. She was immediately eligible to work, to sign her son Nikita up for school, to use public benefits for a year and a half. And I also met a traumatized father named Nduka. He was from Nigeria, but he'd lived in Ukraine for 25 years before the war broke out. He was beaten and harassed trying to flee that conflict, and he was legally required to leave Poland within 15 days. These vastly different experiences, fleeing the exact same violent conflict, threw into stark relief a kind of inequality that I've observed all over the globe. Right now, more than 1 in 100 people on the planet are displaced from their homes, and that number is only growing because of conflicts and climate change. But not all refugees are treated as equally deserving. And that difference often comes down to their nationality, their religion, or their race. This is an uncomfortable truth I've been observing since long before I became a journalist. I grew up in Merced, which is just 3 hours from here. It's in the Central Valley, home to some of the richest soil in California that's worked by some of the poorest people in this state who've come there from all over the world. I saw firsthand among my classmates and peers how, just like race and socioeconomic status, immigration status serves as another form of systemic inequality. It influences the entire trajectory of a person's life, from the countries that will shelter them in a time of war, to their treatment their children can expect in a moment of desperation at the border. This is an uncomfortable truth I've dedicated myself as a journalist to helping expose. Already, separated families are citing my article in court, arguing that the officials responsible for family separation should have to be deposed under oath. Under the Biden administration, an Immigration Policy Office convened a meeting among bureaucrats to talk about how to speak up when they're asked to do something that they feel violates their values. Professors have assigned my article to students who are covering politics, public policy, immigration, history, and other subjects. And later this month, I'll be publishing a database of records that I relied on for my story so that they can be accessed for decades to come by members of Congress, by people in politics, and by the separated families themselves, hundreds of whom remain apart today. Because my job as a journalist is to dig into stories and help you understand them better, so that the next time you're confronted with scapegoats or simple solutions to help explain something you don't feel good about, you'll pause to consider the whole story in all its nuance and complexity, no matter how uncomfortable it makes us. Thank you.